Alright, what up everybody, Colton Rigor, back with another video. This one is going to be the finale to my top 100 games of all time list. So this will be my number 10 to my number 1, my top 10 games of all time. I just want to take a little bit of time to thank everybody who's tuned into the series and anybody who showed love for the series in any of the videos throughout. Even if this is your first video, thank you, appreciate you being here and stopping by. Hope you really enjoy the video. I'll link the rest of the playlist in the description below for anybody interested, especially if this is our first video. This is actually the last video in a series of my top 100 games of all time. I think it's across like 5 or 6 videos total. Just a reminder of the rules beforehand. These are kind of the rules I set for myself for the list. 1, not more than 2 for a certain franchise. Just keep it a little fresh with the list. There's certain game franchises that I'm such a big fan of that they would fill multiple slots on the list, which I find a little boring and repetitive, especially because a lot of them are very similar. So I limited myself to the best 2 of a series, and just for more reference for people saying why isn't this game in, why isn't this game in, wasn't that game in, this one's my favorite of all time, why isn't this one in, this one's a classic, blah 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 blah. I don't go really past anything past the PS1 in terms of retro. I didn't really grow up in myself. I played mainly the PS1 up as a kid. So like the Game Boy Advance and PS1, that's kind of my farthest back point for anything on this list. Not that I have anything against it, it's just personally not my preference. So yeah, that's just an overview of the little rules I set for myself. So without further ado, let's just get right into the video. Alright, we're going to start off at the list at number 10 with Bayonetta 2. My quick best description of Bayonetta 2 is just one of those games that you go in and it's just fun all the way through. It's one of those games that you launch, it's nothing too serious, there's no like deep moral conundrums, there's no multiplayer you're worrying about, there's no metas, there's no none of that. It's just you load up a single player playthrough, you play through the game, you play through the entire thing, and the whole time you're thinking, wow, this is really fun. That's basically how I would describe it. So what Bayonetta is, for those of you who don't know, it's a hack and slash game made by Platinum Games. Platinum Games is known for games like Anarchy Reigns, Vanquish, a bunch of other like really stylish, over the top hack and slash or shooter games, and they're really known for their fast pace and quick combat with really good musical and theatric moments put in that really all kind of tie it together. And Bayonetta is definitely their staple and gem at the moment. Like most of everybody, I started with the first game, Bayonetta 1. Really actually the game that got me back into hack and slash games. I was never really a huge fan of them, but I picked up Bayonetta 1 on the PS3, fell in love with it. I really like the cast of characters. I like that it has a really good sense of humor, a little bit of dark humor mixed with the really cool and dark and gritty, over the top kind of narrative. It has like a really well blended version of the two. And Bayonetta 2 just takes those themes and the comedy and the characters and stuff like that and just ramps it up a notch in the second game. In my opinion, even with the third game in mind, this is still the best games in terms of how the characters interact with each other, how the story is delivered, the music, the atmosphere, the art style, and all that. I think it's the best in this game. The combat of this game is definitely where it shines and kind of its bread and butter of the entire series. For those of you who've played Smash Bros. And seen Bayonetta in Smash Bros., you know she's known for the witch time. So basically this game is a hack and slash game that relies a lot on, instead of parrying like in a Dark Souls game or something like that where you're directly blocking the attack, you dodge it more at perfect times, which you enter a slowdown state, and then you can do really insane combos, get extra damage, and kind of just put the pressure on when you're in that kind of slow motion mode. And you're kind of just constantly trying to activate that mode and keep that going and keep combos going in order to be as clean and flashy as possible. What Bayonetta does to make it a little more interesting is the enemy variety. Start off with your basic range melee, basic really small units, slowly work your way up to like the bruisers, the kind of middle class ones that take a little bit more hits, and then where this game really shines is the boss fights. There's such a great variety in the boss fights throughout these games. That's ranging from 1 to 3. But this game in particular, the boss fights have a different range of even gameplay mechanics past the original game. There's some where you're like surfing on water or moving around different obstacles, then fighting on top of them as well. Kind of mixes and matches it, and all the bosses are super unique, super well done, and really thought out. And unlike the Switch, which this is another topic for another video, but the Switch can't really handle Bayonetta 3. There's a lot of stuttering and frame drops, and it just doesn't look as clean, and the combat's it feels a little more clunky, I would say, than this one. The Wii U is built and sturdy enough to handle this game really well. Visually fantastic. The fights and all that, you don't get a drop of lag. The levels throughout these games are very well paced. There's a good mix of really cool cutscenes that are really well done. As I said before, the characters in these games are awesome. They each have their own little kind of niche, one or two jokes or one or two kind of run-ins with Bayonetta that are kind of the same throughout each game, but it's done really well. It's almost like a reoccurring TV show where there's all these like characters that you know how it's kind of going to interact, but it always unfolds in different ways. You got like your badass demon guy in Ronin who goes get you and builds all the weapons. You got the little Italian guy, I can't remember his name, but he's kind of like the punchline through the whole thing. You got her sister, which is a good kind of rival ally throughout her, so there's like a little cool dynamic between the two of them. And overall the story is very comedic style, and over-the-top nature helps blend in with how over-the-top the combat is. You feel like you're playing an insane, like old school kung fu movie where it's like super over the top and really done stupidly. It feels like that, but in a game is how I would describe it. One thing Platinum Games always nails with their games is the music and the atmosphere in these games and the art style. The music in this game is fantastic, really suits each of the different boss encounters, each of the different enemy types, and Bayonetta herself, the little demon kind of cafe or bar that Ronin runs, that has its own music set. It all just fits really well. You have like the smooth jazz and stuff like that for Ronin stuff. You have the more angelic but dark for the angels, and then you have like the more hardcore and melodic stuff for when you run into the demons in these games, and it's all really well timed and paced. The music feels really kind of woven into the experience as you go. The art style in these games are fantastic. A lot of shiny, vibrant colors that really fit. As I say, I've been saying for this whole review of this game, the over-the-top nature of the game, it's really what shines in this game. And Bayonetta herself actually fits that as well with her over-the-top personality. It's kind of like the sexy, badass action hero type thing, and the whole time you're just enjoying playing her. She's really funny, and she blends in and plays off of all the characters you meet in the game so well, and it's just a fantastic experience. If you haven't picked it up or don't have a Wii U, you could get it on the Switch as well. I would definitely recommend picking this up if you have not gotten into the series. Highly recommend, and that's why it gets on my list. Then next up, coming in at number 9, we have the original Battlefront. This might be a little bit of a controversial take, but I prefer the original Battlefront over the second one. I have a couple reasons for this, but first let me just explain the overall game if anybody hasn't played it. So for you guys that haven't played this before, if you know the new ones that came out, the EA ones, it's kind of similar to that. It's a third-person / first-person shooter. You can choose what kind of FOV you prefer, and you have a bunch of command posts, and it's kind of like domination in Call of Duty, where you capture the command post. That puts pressure on the unit supply of the enemy team. You capture, they try to capture yours. Basically, the more you have, the less troops they have in their reserves. It's a class-based game, so you have, I think, 5 or 6 total. You have your normal rifleman, you have the healer, which usually has a grenade launcher, or in this game, it's like an electricity gun. You have your specialty unit, which each faction, which there's 4 different factions, has their own specialty unit. For example, the Republic's a guy who gets to fly and has like a rocket EMP gun. You have your sniper, and then you have your rocket launcher guy. So it's very simple in terms of the classes, but it works really well. And basically the whole game, through all the different modes you have, you're playing that same core concept game mode of the conquest battles with that kind of domination gameplay style I was talking about. So for modes in this game, you have your campaign, which takes you through a lot of the historical battles of the game. It kind of hard sets you aside and you play through them. One of my favorites, actually one of the first ones, where you play through the Naboo battle versus the droid army as the Gungans. It's kind of just stupid and fun, but it's a little fun gimmicky one. Then you have the instant action, which is you can pick out of any of the maps, pick any of the factions that are available for it, and kind of just pick and select which modes you want to play and play them out either split screen or by yourself. And then you have Galactic Conquest, which is probably the best mode in the game, where you play these preset map layouts. It'll give you like an overview map of a bunch of different planets. You say you're playing the Empire and you're facing the Rebels. You'll start off with like 3 planets. They'll start off with like 5 planets, and you got to attack and conquer all the different battlefields on each of the planets in order to control the planets. You control the planets, you gain like a planetary boost that will give you like a bonus you can activate in the next fight, or in this game it will lead up to your special ability, and then your special ability, say for the Empire, you can just basically take the Death Star and blow up an entire planet and take it off the board. So each one has their own kind of variation of that. So those are the modes, and why this game gets so high and why this is not just like a generic shooter that I enjoyed as a kid and it was kind of fun and nostalgic, is that it's just so well done. It captures the look and feel of the Star Wars movies, but adding that little gritty tone to it by making it feel more like the harshness of like war would have been actually. It's not like all the glitz and glam of the movies. It's kind of that like harsh in the trenches feel that you would feel as much for a Star Wars game that has no trenches. But you kind of get what I'm saying there. And this is one of those games that won't be too high if you're not a Star Wars fan, but if you're a Star Wars fan, you'll appreciate that each map and each location you visit has little callbacks to the movies, different scenes from different films, and all the major battles. Like you got the Hoth battles, you got your the Sand Pit from Mos Eisley, you got your Endor battles. There's just so many different ones that are covered, and they do it so well. The combat's fantastic. Very simple and smooth is what I would describe it as. You have your basic rolls, you have your grenades, your secondary grenades, primary weapon, secondary weapon. Then you have all the classes that you can slide through. One of the things I would say is better in this game, if you prefer a little challenge, is that the AI actually is a lot better in this game, I find, in the second game. So if you play on the higher difficulties, it's actually a pretty good challenge playing by yourself or with somebody to actually beat some of the AI on some of the maps. I also think this game has the best map selection with the secondary Naboo battles. You have your secondary Tatooine IV with the pit. You have the Yavin 4 ones, the arena one. It's just, I find there's so many different varieties of maps. There's a lot of closed corridors ones. There's a lot of really open ones with vehicles. I think this game has the best variety out of the two. It also, I think, with the art style and the kind of more gray tones, really nails that grittiness of the game. I think the second one leans more into like the movies and stuff like that, where it's kind of over the top, glitz and glammy, and it's like it's more pretty action than like gritty. And I think in terms of being that you're playing as the grunt troops on the front line, I think this style fits the game better. The music, straight from the movies, fantastic, added in here, fantastic to listen to. It always gives me a good nostalgia trip launching the game, hearing the music start and seeing that title screen and stuff like that. It just takes me back to enjoying those movies for the first time. So a little bit of nostalgia mixed in with just a quality game that's always fun to go back and play through. And it's just a good pick up and play game if you come home and you're like, I got 10 minutes to bust out something before I have to go do something else. Play a couple games of Battlefront, you're feeling good, you had a good time, pop it out, go back to it later. Like it's just such a quality game. Alright, next up would actually be a shocker game if you know my gaming tastes or tuned into the channel and know kind of where my opinions lie on certain game genres. So I am personally not a huge fan of turn-based strategy. I think it's kind of repetitive and boring to me. I just can never get into it. I've tried like the Pokemon games, Final Fantasy and all that. I've just never been able, it's just not a combat style for me. But with just how quality this game was, it had to be on the list. It was one of my favorite games to play through in terms of an overall experience of a game. No real nostalgia here, just pure one experience, played through it once. It was just an incredible experience, so it had to end up on the list this high, and that is Persona 4 Golden. Now, for those of you who don't know about the Persona series, Persona is a JRPG turn-based strategy game. This game in particular Follows a group of kids. I think they're high school level, I'm pretty sure. And they're trying to solve a murder mystery going on in their town. There's a bunch of strange disappearances, bodies hanging up certain places, and you're trying to figure out kind of who done it, and it kind of ties into their own lives in certain ways, and they kind of become more involved over time themselves. So their stories and the overarching story kind of tie together. You play as a character, he's not named you in this. In the anime, he's named you, and then later on they've added his name as you. But in this, you just play as him. Basically, you start off coming in on a train, meeting your uncle and niece. I'm pretty sure they're in relation. It's been a while since I played through it. Basically, you're there to spend a semester of school there and get like kind of a fresh feel, a fresh start kind of in a new place. So you set up there, you set up your classes, stuff like that, and slowly you start to realize that there's kind of this weird aura that you can see around the town. And you realize that there's these like monsters that are popping up. But basically how this game works is each of the characters that you run into basically learn to summon these things called personas, aka the name of the game. And they're basically kind of like, basically the easiest way to describe it is they're like Pokemon. So they're like Pokemons from the soul or something like that. And basically you summon them. There's a bunch of different varieties of them you can catch and collect and upgrade and merge together and fuse a bunch of like super powerful ones later on. That's kind of like where your super main powers come from and your special abilities come from. You also just have weapons and you can attack with that as well. And overall, it's just pretty solid and simple turn-based combat. They have a few different cool mechanics mixed in with like a knockdown mechanic where you can knock down all the enemies, then you can gang up for this like super attack. Certain characters can kind of tie off of each other, and if their bonds and relationships high enough, they can activate like special passives throughout the fight. For example, Yukiko and Chie, they were in my party, so sometimes randomly they will unleash this special attack that only those two can do together. It'll just be after your turn, randomly it'll come out. So it's kind of little unique things like that that give it a little twist to a normal turn-based combat. And what this game does to take that really good solid base foundation of the turn-based combat and elevate it is the story and the overarching experience of the game tied into that solid combat. So basically your general gameplay loop for this game will be you go, do your classes, get special abilities, and level up your stats overall in terms of like your knowledge, your charisma, your persuasion. There's a bunch of other ones like stamina, stuff like that, that affect all the other parts of the game. And then basically tie that in the school. You go to school with all the people that will be in your party and some of the people you'll run into throughout the game along the way. So all the characters and all that are tied into this school and the town that you're in called Inaba. And basically after school you go around town searching for challenges to do, ways to level up, ways to increase your bond by hanging out with your friends who are also your party members, and kind of rinse and repeating that cycle throughout the thing, then going into dungeons or continuing the story part of the game where you kind of go through these giant towers of floors and floors and floors of enemy until you get to the boss fight. And while you're kind of on that full cycle of hitting all the gameplay elements, you're experiencing this extravagant story of this amazing murder mystery story that's kind of the overarching plot. Each character has their own sub-story, which in this game, in my opinion, all the characters are really likable and they all have their really unique, and some are fun, some are a little darker, some are a little sad, but they're all super interesting sub-stories. Beside Marie, she's kind of a poetry thing, not really my thing, but overall she was okay as well. But overall, all the characters are super interesting. They all have your little unique niches, and it's one of those games where I felt like I wanted to go talk to everybody after every single main story quest. Whenever they had a new chance to level up on and stuff, I was right over there because I was just so interested to expand and learn about all these different characters and how they interact with the town and their character growth throughout the game. And while you figure out the murder mystery stuff, it'll be like a super heavy part where you figure out something about the murder mystery, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, snap back to it. Oh wait, these are just high school kids. And oh look, this week it's a field trip to another part of town. So it'll be a field trip completely separate. You guys will go like snowboarding or skiing, and it'll just be about them growing as friends and stuff like that. and it's just that amazing balance of learning about these people, experiencing the story of the overarching murder mystery, leveling up your characters and your persona, getting your character stronger, interacting with kind of different side characters throughout the game through their little like side quests and stuff like that, leveling up the character bonds between you and their characters, and experiencing the story all together throughout the game. All this really adds up to one of the most, I would say, this is probably a stupid way to say this, I'm gonna sound like a giant loser for saying it like this, most fulfilling game I think I've played ever. It's one where I finished it and I was like, dang, I wish this could continue. Like, man, I would love to see like how the characters grow from here, how the story goes from here, how this character continues with this, how this character goes on with this character, and how they grow up there. Like, it's one of the ones that I would like to see the conclusion to all the characters, like complete lives type thing. Like, that's how invested you get into the characters and the story of this game, in my opinion, at least how I felt throughout the game. And all this is tied into probably one of the best soundtracks in a video game I've ever heard. The art style is fantastic, and the soundtrack goes with it so well. A lot of really upbeat tunes, really kind of like Japanese pop, but a lot of it's in English. And then you have a little bit of like rock and a little like kind of metal, with some kind of EDM in there, mixing depending on like the dungeon type thing. Each dungeon kind of has their own theme song, and it's all really well done, and there's not a bad song in this batch. Heartbreak Harmony is my favorite for anybody who's played the game. And overall, just an incredible experience of a game. That's how I'd basically describe it. It's a game, but it's an experience. It's like experiencing one of those TV shows that you've watched like in the entire like 24 seasons of, and it finally finished. That's how I felt after this game. Alright, so coming at number 7, we have Skate 3. So this, in my opinion, is the greatest skateboarding game of all time. I know, Tony Hawk fans. I'm also a Tony Hawk fan, and I know this is like one of the worst things I could say, but in my opinion, it's just how I feel. I really enjoy the Tony Hawk games. They have been on this list lower, but in my opinion, this is my favorite skateboarding game of all time. And I'll give you a few reasons for that, not just state that and move on. So what Skate is it's kind of a mix of a simulation and an arcadey style skateboarding game. So you have the skateboarding mechanics work in this. Like, it's not a fully arcade game like Tony Hawk where you're jumping off these huge ramps, pressing a bunch of buttons and spinning and stuff like that, doing like 50 different tricks, landing right into a manual off of a revert, then continuing this huge ass combo that takes like 14 years. You're up to like millions of points and stuff like that. You're not at that level, and you're not the simulation style where it's kind of like trick, rail, done. Like, you can kind of expand a little past that. It's kind of the middle ground between the two. So you do your tricks with a controller. You do like flips. So say you want to ollie, it would be down, up, nollie, up, down, and then the rail would just be automatic. And you can do grabs with like the side, the back triggers and stuff like that. So it works really well with the game. So what Skate 3 is about in terms of story is basically you're this like legendary skateboarder who just got out. You're like a mute because, you know, voice acting hard, but basically you're starting your own skateboarding brand. So you kind of start the game, make your logo, make your skateboarding name for your brand, hire your first skater, so you can have like a crew of people that kind of skate with you, and you can have them on challenges and stuff like that, and then start going out trying to promote your band. So you do this through a bunch of different gameplay elements. This is one of the ways I think this is the best skateboarding game, is the variety of different gameplay types you can do in this game. Just to go over the game modes I can remember off the top of my head, is you have your normal own the spots, which is kind of a staple of these series, where you'll just be skating around this open world, and you'll come across a skateboarding spot. It'll become a little marker. You basically go to beat the high score on it, and that will basically, you like claim the spot, is how it works in the game. And then everything that you do in terms of gameplay elements gets you board sales. So you'll have like company board sales that pop up that give you milestones and unlock different rewards for your company, like more skaters, a promotional piece, magazine covers and stuff like that. It'll slowly unlock through all these different levels for your company. And then your goal is to get to 1 million board sales total, which is kind of like the end game. But you have your basically own the spots. You have the trainee competitions, which is like your normal pools or ramps, like vert style competitions. You have your street style competitions where it's more about rails, staircases, ledges, like more of that open world skating is how I would best describe it. Then you get into the more creative and over the top game modes. You have your death races, which is basically you start at the top of a giant hill and basically you are boom down that hill as fast as you can versus like 5 other people. You're weaving way, crashing, flying up places, going up these huge ramps and stuff like that just to get to the end. It's basically a basic race. But the game actually handles it pretty well, and it's a good mix and feels great to play. Then you have probably a fan favorite of the series is the Thrasher Hall of Meat challenges. So basically these are modes where your goal is to take your skater, fly him off of some sort of cliff, mountain, building, and do as much damage, break as much bones as possible, and do it as the most creative way as possible. So some of them they have you jump off cliffs into like bins and try to do damage by hitting certain objects continuously. There's certain ones where you have to break a certain amount of bones in your body. There's certain ones where you have to get a certain amount of distance flinging your body off of huge ramps. It's just, that's where the arcadey and kind of over the top and not simulation style of gameplay comes in. It's where it's best in this game, to be honest. And just that variety of gameplay with this really solid, really well done skate mechanics with the flip stick gives that level of control and makes all these different elements feel so good to do. There's not one game mode where I'm like, this kind of feels crappy. I guess the worst would be the death races where it gets kind of stiff and you kind of lose your edging sometimes. But overall, the whole game feels like a great gameplay experience. And they added in this game, you can get off your board, so you can do a lot of little fun, stupid stuff with that. You can smack people over the head with your board just walking around. And there's this really famous glitch where you throw your board, you bring it back, and you do, I think it's like a dive, and then slam back into the ground, and you'll get launched up in the air. It's a really famous glitch. But you can do some really fun stuff with that as well. Music has a great sound selection, a lot of rock, rap, classic rock, really well balanced playlist. And the whole thing of building your own brand is just a fun little add-on to it. Overall, just in my opinion, the best skateboarding game out there. Huge skateboarding, snowboarding game fan. So I had to make my list this high. Alright, so next up we have Dragon Age Origins. Dragon Age 2 is on the list, I think in the last video or the video before. So for those of you who don't know these games, these are BioWare RPGs. This game in particular follows the same combat style as the Old Republic games, if you played those, where it's kind of like turn-based in terms of you press your abilities and it has like a certain set time to come out, and your character kind of auto attacks and does it for you. You just kind of select which attack is coming out next. It's real time, as in you can move your character around, you can select which enemies to attack, and everybody's doing it in real-time combat. It's just it has the same elements as a turn-based where you're kind of picking and selecting which attacks and which special attacks and items to use. You can also swap between all the characters in your party. That's basically the general gameplay sense. It works well, it's smooth. If you played Old Republic, you know exactly how this game plays. So what this game really gets you on and what really hooks you is the story and the fantasy atmosphere this game has. For those of you who haven't played a BioWare game before, they're really known for the character development, the kind of tie-in of overarching story with all these different side characters and all these different party members you meet and how they all interact and interface with the story in different ways, giving you a bunch of different ways to experience the game if you wanted to do a multiple different playthroughs. So this game has a bunch of different classes, kind of your basic RPG classes. You have your rogue, archer, warrior, tank, two-hander, mage, and a healer. So you kind of mix and match, make your character out of one of those, and then you can recruit people to fill out the other party slots. If you played Mass Effect or the Knights of the Old Republic games, this game works very similar in that your character is either very specifically neutral, very specifically good, or very specifically bad, and your character attributes, style in terms of appearance, and gameplay abilities and elements in terms of interaction, in terms of chat options, really depends on which kind of route you want to go. And this in terms interacts with the allies you have. So certain allies lean towards being bad, so they'll more closely interact and be associated with you if you're on the evil playthrough, and other ones that react more if you're on the good side, and some of them are just plain neutral. It all is then tied into this overarching story where it's kind of generic fantasy where there's this kind of evil entity that's come down and released this demon spawn, this blight spawn, and it's going around basically slaughtering all the humans, and you're trying to figure out, one, where the hell this all came from, and two, how to stop it. So that's kind of your goal, and you're like a warden, so you're made to stop kind of like monsters and dragons and demons and that type of stuff. That's kind of your niche. And very similar to Persona, in my opinion, what this game excels at so well, and how this game got so high on this, is the characters. There's a bunch of different characters you'll introduce into your party. All of them have their really unique personalities and really unique traits that interact with every single element of the story. So we'll go through and enter a new place. You can talk to your characters. They'll have different comments about this place, like, oh, I was here at a certain time, this happened. Or, oh, if you go into like the dwarf area, they're like, I don't really trust dwarves, not really a fan, kind of too short type thing. Like, there's all these different elements that taking each different party member in will unlock you, and they each have their own little sub-story quests that you go through and learn more about them and have little character growth between different characters throughout the entirety of the game. And I kind of found bringing my two favorite characters along and having them experience the story with me together throughout the entire game, then having another story where I take a different combination of characters and run them through the same story, getting those different specific interactions in between is a really fun experience in these games, and one of the best things about this game. While the main story is pretty generic, all the different little towns and all their individual quests, while kind of fall into generic fantasy, are really well done and have their own very good twists. I enjoyed the combat enough. The combat was solid. The characters and overarching story carried this game so much, made me enjoy that fantasy feeling, got me into that mindset of, this is just a badass story. I feel like a badass playing through this entire game. The combat and melee mechanics have been set up. My character's great. I love my character. My party's really cool. It's been balanced perfectly, and it was just a blast to play through. And this is one of those games that really got me into RPGs in more of a hardcore sense. There's a game later I'll be talking on that got me initially into RPGs, but this is the one that started my love of finding more obscure and more hardcore RPGs. I don't play any of the super hardcore ones, but more hardcore than the basic ones is what I'm saying. And overall, character development, main story, and the overarching balance of those two is really what made me enjoy my experience with this game so much. So actually, to come clean to you guys before filming this, I originally had Dragon Age Origins and Bully flip-flopped, but I was thinking about it as I was placing the games down, and I was like, I love Dragon Age Origins. It was an amazing playthrough, amazing couple playthroughs, but this game, Bully, really is a game that I've played through, or at least started, like 5 to 6 times. Probably fully played through, I think, 2 to 3 times, and is one I can always come back through, start up no matter what, and enjoy my experience all the way through. It's just such a quality game that, honestly, I was sitting there, I was like, this is hard, but I have to put it before it. So Bully comes in on number 5 for me. I'm actually realizing this video is full of controversial takes. This is another one. I believe this is the best game Rockstar has ever put out. So to start off, Bully is a very simple game in terms of story. Your player is Jimmy Hopkins. He basically is a kind of no-good child. He's kind of been thrown out of a bunch of different schools and expelled from a bunch of different schools. His basically mother, who doesn't give a shit about him, and her new sugar daddy basically drop him off at this school that's known to house like the worst kids out of the country, and basically go, see you later, we're going on a cruise for a year, have fun, loser, and then kicks him to the curb, sends him to the private school, and it's like, alright, see you later. So basically, then you start off your story right then and there. You're playing as Jimmy Hopkins, trying to figure out kind of how to navigate this school in the harsh elements of basically kid culture back in high school or elementary school, kind of that harsh clique culture. So right away, you are introduced to one of my favorite elements of this game, which is the combat and kind of mechanics throughout this game. It's similar to a GTA or Red Dead game in terms of how like the health and kind of the shooting mechanics work. You have like a little slingshot you can use for some of the range mechanics, but this game relies a lot on beat 'em up mechanics. So you have like your punches, your kicks, your heavy kicks, your grab, your clinch moves, your tackles and stuff like that. It plays kind of like a junior cadets fighting game is how I describe the combat, and seeing it in terms of like kids beating the snot out of each other it's really funny, and really is enjoyable experience going around basically as a school bully throughout the entire game. So besides the fact that the combat is pretty solid and pretty funny and fits the game really well, what you'll first run into this game is you'll notice it's a very crude game. For those of you who are a fan of crude comedy like myself, you'll enjoy this game a lot. It's crude to the extent that it can still get a teen rating, so it kind of falls into that kind of early South Park humor, where it's kind of crude, but it fits the level of comedy and stuff that kids at this age would talk about and get into. So it kind of fits into that not over the top super criminal vibes as like a GTA. It has that more toned back and kind of like childish feeling of it, and that's sprinkled out through the entire game, which is actually a very good sized game with a pretty big map. There's a bunch of different characters you'll meet throughout the game. So you have your main characters that you interact, which is like Gary, the little small kid, I can't remember his name, the big dude, Russell, and some of the teachers you'll meet that become main story characters a little later on in the game. Each of them has their own very unique kind of personalities and stuff like that. They mesh really well with Hopkins, more rash and kind of just straight to the point, and kind of head first mentality that he has. And you'll actually learn, even though it's kind of not the deepest game and there's not a huge bunch of character development, you'll actually really learn to like Hopkins, and he's a really good main character and a lot of fun to play through his experience. Besides your main characters, you have your cliques. So basically how this works is there's like a faction system. So the school, one of the best parts of the game is each individual student around the school campus, and you'll see them around the town and stuff like that, is their actual individual character. So they all have their own names, their own little NPC, they all look different, and they all interact with different people differently. It has that kind of unique feeling that no other games really give you, where each time you go down the hall, each time you go to a class, each time you go downtown and you see all these kids from school, you're like, oh, that's where you are, whatever, Peter, whoever, and you'll know exactly who that is and who they're with, how they interact with you and stuff like that, depending on which point of the game. And it's a really unique, cool experience that kind of simulates school very well. And all these characters fit into different factions. So there's a bunch of different factions in this game. You got your bullies, your nerds, your preps, your greasers, and your jocks. There might be one I'm missing in there, but I think that's all of them. So basically, this game will work as you go through different chapters and different stories like any other game, and you'll unlock different new factions that you're dealing with. So the first, you'll start off against, for example, you start off against the bullies. You take them down and you gain their respect. Then you go on to fight the nerds. You're basically going through different missions and stuff like that, and you have a rating system with each faction, so you can get to like up to 100% faction notoriety, where it's like you're good friends with them, they're on your side, and so you get into a fight, and one of the bully kids, who happens to be one of your people that you just finished a chapter with, so they like you at the moment, is beside you and just walking by. He'll join in and help you beat the crap out of whoever you're fighting. So it's kind of an interesting element to it. Then you have the factions that will hate you, that the second they see you, they'll come up and trick you or put a kick me sign on your back or throw marbles or a stink bomb at you. So there's that different variety, and throughout the game you'll gain positive with certain factions, negative with certain factions, and they'll kind of fluctuate, given different experiences throughout the chapters to keep them fresh. Each of the chapters kind of focuses on their unique clique, and all of them have their unique, really funny stories with different side characters, different girls Jimmy tries to get to be his girlfriend and stuff like that. So you interact with all these different characters. You'll go on like little school dates with the girls of the faction. You'll fight the big boss men of the factions. Some of them have their different mini games, like the preps are big boxers. So one of the things you have to do is beat all the top preps in a boxing tournament. So it has its own little mini game with that. So there's such a different variety, different tone changes and pace changes throughout these different story chapters, depending on which faction you're fighting at the time. One of the things this game does fantastically as well, and it has great music, like fantastic music. The general riff and bass guitar, that riff that you get walking around everywhere, is incredible. I would highly recommend looking it up. But each faction also has their own unique kind of soundtrack and theme song that really fits the different factions and adds a little element, a little fun element to the game. Besides the main story, you have a bunch of different other mini games as well. You have bike races, arcades, the boxing tournaments, as I said, and a couple others that I can't remember off the top of my head, but they all tie into giving you powers, upgrades, different places for you to stay, and hiding places and save points that will interact with you throughout the entire game. Probably one of the best parts about the game, or one of my favorite parts, is all the different classes you go to. So it's like Persona, kind of in a very crude way, where besides the main story and the main faction quests and the subquests and stuff like that, you're also still a kid and you're still going to class. So each class has their own little mini game. So you got like chemistry, writing, maps, science, chemistry, where you all do all these different mini games. I think the two examples I have here is chemistry and English. Chemistry is kind of like Guitar Hero, pressing the buttons to match, and English, you're doing word scrambles to try to figure out different words from a word scramble to get a passing grade. So what's great about these is they all have their little unique mini game. They also tie in really well that completing each of these classes, each of them have 5 ramping up difficulties of the mini game, gets you bonuses and unlock certain items throughout the game to help you kind of upgrade your character. That's kind of how you progress. It all ties into the Rockstar formula you know and love, with a great cinematics before each of the quests, really tying in the characters and the story together, but in this more of like a crude comedic way. It's always a game I can come back, start up, play through the entire thing, and it feels just as fresh as the first time. Alright, so coming out at number 4, we have The Witcher 3. I've talked about this a lot on the channel. In my opinion, one of the greatest RPGs of all time. I was a little bit hesitant going into this game. I heard a lot about it, heard a lot of good things. I went into it, I think the release week. I don't know if I was on the release day, but definitely the release week. And I saw it, I was like, you know what? I got enough money for one game here. This game looks like it'll at least last me a while. And if it's as good as other people say, I'll fall in love with it. And just like I thought, I fell in love with the game. For those of you who have not heard of The Witcher, it's basically you play as Geralt. Geralt is a Witcher in a fictional fantasy universe where he basically is a specifically bred and kind of trained human, partially, that is specifically trained to hunt and kill monsters. And his job is to go around and take kind of bounties on monsters, hunt them, kill them, or get rid of them in some ways, or basically solve the issue of them. He's kind of like pest control. So The Witcher 3, that's kind of like one of the main sub-stories, is you going around being a Witcher, taking on these contracts, killing or dealing with all these different types of monsters that are super unique and super different in the ways you go around figuring out how to get rid of them, figuring out their weaknesses, or just talking to them and being like, hey, Do you mind leaving these people alone? That's great. All right, see you later. And besides that, you have this amazing overarching story, and you're trying to find this girl you've been training, Siri. She's kind of gone off and she's being hunted by this thing known as the Wild Hunt. And your goal is basically to find her, stop them, and kind of figure out what you guys are going to do and move forward with. By no means do you reach that quickly. What this game is really known for and does really well is the amount of content in this game is fantastic. So you'll run in through, you'll slowly enter a new area, you'll get a bunch of little Witcher contracts and little sub-story quests. They're little small quests, but are fun to do, and each have their own like individual choices and replayability options for it, depending on how you want to shape and make Geralt into what type of character you want. Besides those small quest lines in this area that you just unlocked, there'll be this huge overarching story that has multiple different endings, multiple different character choices. You run into a bunch of characters from other games. You'll kill or save or get rid of or befriend or make love with, as Geralt makes love with everybody in this game. But you'll have all those choices for all these different characters just in this one area. Then you'll go to this new area, which is completely different vibe, completely cool, different architecture, different types of people, different types of main characters, and you'll do that experience all over again. You're like, wow, that was incredible. Then you're like, oh, let's go to the next place, completely different architecture, same thing, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. And each area you go through, it's this brand new experience. It feels like almost you took the same character and just plopped them into a different RPG, and then took the character, plopped them into a different RPG, took the character and plopped them into a different RPG. Like, it's such a fresh experience going to different towns and different areas, figuring out what's going on, what contracts and monsters they need killed, what's the main issue of the town. Is it a civil war? Are we trying to kill a king? Are we trying to figure out this dead wife's mansion, why it's haunted, stuff like that. So there's so much different variety of it. You even fight in a medieval tournament in this game, which is one of my favorite parts of the game. It's just so much variety and hitting on so many different fan favorite fantasy points from a bunch of different games and bringing them into all these different sub-stories and quests is just a blast to play through. And Geralt is a fantastic character and one of my favorite main characters. A fellow long hair man, very straight to the point, very strict. You can turn him into kind of like a sarcastic dark guy, kind of like the Hound. You can make him just a full-on asshole. You can make him kind of in the middle, like a good guy who's just a little rash in how he delivers his stuff. There's that choice, but he's always Geralt in any of the choices you pick. There's so many different ways to end this game with each of the different characters you made. Even the ending, there's so many different endings to the actual game itself. So this is just one of those games I don't want to spoil too much of. If you're an RPG fan at all, this is a fantastic game to play. The combat's great as well. Basically basic hack and slash combat with some powers built in. So you have like shield, fire. You have this one where you put down a hex trap and any like ghosts or enemies will kind of be trapped in it and take extra damage. So there's a bunch of different variety of combat maneuvers that kind of create your own build. And for any of you who are RPG fans out there and for some reason have not picked up The Witcher, definitely get your hands on it. And the DLC is fantastic in this game. It's like another 60 hours or 30 hours of just incredible gameplay, incredible story. So finish the game, buy this DLC. Can't recommend this game enough. One of the most classic intros of all time. One of those intros that anybody who's played the game, anybody who's seen any gameplay of the game, know exactly where that's from, know exactly what's going to happen in the next 15 minutes. And for those of you who, like me, who have played that in the beginning 4 or 5 or 6 times, I know exactly who I'm going to go with at the start, what route I'm going to take, all these weapons, what different character I'm gonna make, all that stuff, all that's rushing through your head as you're seeing it again, and that nostalgia is hitting you. So for the one or two people that happen to not know what Skyrim is a RPG game that came out in the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 era. It's part of the Elder Scrolls series. What these games are known for is basically a game where you're dropped in, you make your character out of a bunch of different races, like orcs, basic Nords, a bunch of different human variations, your wood elves, your high elves, and you pick your character, you make your character. You have a bunch of different specializations in terms of your weaponry. You have like melee, sword and board. You have your hammers, mages, archery, daggers, your basic fantasy stuff. And basically they take you, have a main story, basically drop you at some point in the game and give you some quest finders to go, and they're basically like, go explore this giant open world and figure out what you want to do, figure out what quests you want to start, figure out what enemies and main stories you want to go do first, and just do them. Like, there's no rush to do, hey, you gotta do this one, this is the level 1 zone, hey, this is a level 2 zone, hey, this. It all scales around you, and you can go your own place exploring all these different quest lines and doing them at your own pace, and it's just an amazing experience. The combat in this game is solid, definitely improvement on Oblivion. Pretty basic hack and slash and bow mechanics, but it works well, and mixed in with the powers of you being the Dragonborn, and you have a bunch of different powers, and the magic, and being able to hotkey all of them and switch through them really quick and create kind of like these combos depending on your playstyle is a lot of fun to do, and creating your own different character each time with different specializations is a blast to do. The quest lines in this are fantastic, some of them better than others, but the Dark Brotherhood main story and, in my opinion, the College of Winterhold questline in this game are fantastic. The DLC in this game is great. It's one of those just classic full-on fantasy RPGs that really, if it takes all your favorite things in an RPG, like fantasy-wise, in terms of like tropes, classic characters, classic fights. There's like a big civil war. There's a bunch of different like dark wizards on the loose. There's Daedric, which are like demons that possess like artifacts that you find. It takes all those classic fantasy kind of tropes and puts them into like a very high quality gaming experience that you can take at your own pace. The music, the background kind of music and sound effects through each of the areas and each of the different dungeons and towns and stuff like that fits so well. Composing of all the main darker and gritty and melodic soundtrack in this game fit the game so well. It's such a perfect fantasy experience, and partially why this game makes the list really high for me in that fact, like this is number 3 out of all time for me, is that this is the game that actually got me into RPGs. So the story for this game behind me was, I went to my local EB Games. I walked in, I just finished playing Fallout New Vegas, I think, or Fallout 3, one of the two, on a rental from Blockbusters. So yes, this is very old if Blockbuster is being mentioned. But basically I walked in, I was like, okay, I finished that. I have just enough, I think it was birthday money, or I used to run newspapers, so newspaper money to buy one game. So I walked in, and I literally just saw it behind the counter. There was big displays, there was a ton of copies, filled the entire back wall of the thing. And I was like, oh, what's that game? The cashier's like, oh, it's Skyrim, new game, made by the same people who made like Fallout and stuff. I was like, oh, I kind of enjoyed that. You know, it was a shooter game. I enjoy shooters. So I was like, all right, I'll give that a shot. You know, give me that. So I go home, pop it in, get on that little buggy, going down to the thing. I'm like, oh, okay, this is different. This is cool. And the second I saw the dragon come in, made my character. I'm running through, escaping the dragon, smacking the crap out of people with the sword, and doing little shunt attacks and stuff like that, and creating my class, slowly building up, leveling up. All these different stats is also new to me. I'm like, whoa, look at all these stats. Look at these big trees of skills and stuff. And I can pick from, and oh, I can make my character and customize my look and stuff like that, and all these different item pieces, all the different, because I was a big Lord of the Rings fan as a kid, all these different like cool like Daedric artifacts, all these like demon areas, all that. It just flooded me, and I was like, oh my god, this is the type of game I want to play more of these going on. So it kind of started my love and continued love of RPG games, so it gets a little special bump up for me in that sense. Alright, so for those of you who have watched my top 10 PS3 games of all time video, you know exactly what this game's going to be. It's my favorite PS3 game of all time, and that is Mass Effect 2. I'm holding the trilogy, but it's this one right here. Mass Effect 2, for those of you who don't know, is a third-person shooter RPG game. It's a sci-fi game made by the same people who made Dragon Age, which I just talked about, and Knights of the Old Republic. I'm going to talk about it one more time, just because this is the last RPG on the list. Also, this game was on my top 10 PS3 games of all time, which is a little more in-depth of why I enjoy this game so much. I'm just going to try to keep it brief, because it's going to be very similar to the other games I've talked about. Is the character depth in this game is personally my favorite. This game, the second game, has, in my opinion, the perfect cast of characters. None of the characters you run into are boring. None of the characters you get in your party, you're like, you're not really my favorite, you know, like usually you're on the bench, but you're on this mission, it's, I don't really like you. Like, I don't really feel that with any of the characters in this game. They all interact so well with each other. Not all of them like and dislike each other, or are best friends, or sworn enemies type things. Like, they all have their different unique interactions with each individual character. And same thing with Dragon Age, where you bring them in your party. I like to keep 2 throughout the entire game, besides the ones where they have to be on the thing. I like to keep 2 for the entire game, experience how they specifically interact with each other throughout the entirety of the game. Start another playthrough, bring another 2, experience the game with them, and go through and rinse repeat. The combat is third-person shooting in this game. It's very well done. This game is an insane step above the first game. In my opinion, the third game has the best combat, but this game is right there with it. Very solid cover shooting mechanics, a lot of different weapon variety, being able to control your squad and have them do different abilities, and leveling up their individual powers, creating their own builds, and then creating your builds and having them combo together is a lot of fun to do, especially with all the different classes in the game. And exploring and experience the main story. And it's one of the things I think actually this game does a lot better than a lot of the RPGs I've talked about, is the main story in this game is actually very interesting and ties in extremely well with all the different characters. Like, they all end up having their own kind of piece to the puzzle to the main story. So it's not like, here's the sub-stories, they're on their own different universe, then okay, now we're all just kind of plopped into the main story, and then we all go in the main story. It's like all these little sub-stories, all these different characters and all that tie in really neatly with the entire main story and main plotline. And what these games do so well is, from Mass Effect 1 to 3, all your choices and main choices and character choices on little side quests and stuff like that all carry through. So part of the reason why 2 is fantastic is the choices in Mass Effect 1. 2 is the first game where you get to experience having those choices come back to influence different side quests, different gameplay options, different story options, different dialogue options in the second game. And for me, playing through that originally was amazing to see. It was the first game where that really was an interaction I was having in the game. The main one that struck me the most was in the first game. This will be slight spoilers, so skip if you don't want to hear this. There's this caged, I think it's Rachni Queen, I think that's the name of the alien faction, but it's like this bug faction, and it's the last remaining one. It's kept in like this holding cell that they were running experiments on, and you can choose to kill it or let it go. So I let it go because it was like a sentient species that could also think and talk through dead people to humans. And in the second game, you'll have this person who's being controlled by the Rachni just pop up in a random city, and you talk to them because it has a little quest marker over them. You're like just expecting to go into a different quest, and it's like, hey, I'm from the colony of the thing you saved in the first game. Just letting you know, we're doing pretty good. We're out there if you need us, and yeah, just catching up. And then the third game, you can actually have them as part of your war army for the final fight. So it all ties in really well. And this is the first game where I really experienced that. And some of my favorite characters of all time, like Liara, Garrus, Rex, Miranda, are from this game. Jack are from this game, and it's just, in my opinion, the best cast of characters in the game I've played. Alright, so coming in at number 1, the entirety of me talking for hours at a time, listening to me blabber about games at probably a very slow and boring pace that I over describe too much, have come down to this. This is the number 1 favorite game of Cult Nerdy Core as of right now in 2023, and that is SSX3. SSX3, for those of you who don't know, is a snowboarding game made by EA back when EA was EA Big and EA Sports. It's in the game back old school EA, where they were killing it with all the games they were putting out. For those of you who haven't played this game, it's a snowboarding game, very arcadey, so it's like Tony Hawk in that it's take a snowboarding, what you would think of snowboarding, and just make it super over the top. You're basically doing these huge flips and jumps off of this, hitting these giant rails that go in like loop-de-loops. You have like speed boost and turbo boost. You're doing these insane like quad flips and stuff like that. It's super over the top. You're jumping off your board, flipping it in the air and stuff like that. Super over the top, super fun, and super arcadey. The gameplay in this, in my opinion, is the best by a long shot out of any other snowboarding games I've played. It is such a smooth riding experience. The tricks feel so easy and smooth to combo together. The turbo and maneuvering on the race courses is so smooth and nice. It's just, in my opinion, the purest and most fun snowboarding experience you'll get in a video game is this game. There's one game I'll try to describe, but I think the gameplay shows a lot more than what I can describe in terms of just how over the top, just how smooth and how fun the game looks. So how this game functions is basically you start a career mode with one of the, I think it's like a 12-person roster. You pick your character. My main character is Elise in this game. You'll start off on the mountain. You'll start off with total 0 stats across the board. And you'll go through completing all these different races, slopestyle competitions where you go to do the best run of getting tricks, and then put all these lines together, keeping your multiplier going through this kind of slopestyle obstacle course. You also have your big air events where you kind of go through these it's usually like 2 or 3 different huge ramps where you're trying to get these like multipliers that are in the air and do like crazy tricks to land and beat the high score. You also have your pipe ones where you're going through these half pipe constantly, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, putting up these combos of huge tricks, trying to do different creative ones to get different multipliers off of it. And basically you go through, beat all these courses, level up your characters, create different custom looks for your character, and basically go around conquering the mountain and claiming all the gold medals and platinum medals you can across the thing. It's a very simple concept, but it's just executed so well. And this would be described as the game I can go to, pick up and play the most, go through a whole campaign of it, basically be like, alright, that's good. Go back the next day or another week later, start a fresh campaign, and just go through and play it again, and it'll just feel as fresh and as new and awesome as before. The controls and the gameplay is so smooth and so much fun. It's one of those games you can just go back and sit down, have a little fun with, and move on. It has great split screen. Split screen runs really well. The level of smoothness, feel, and control you have over the characters is fantastic. The racing in this game is incredible. The race courses and slopestyle courses are designed so well. They all have their different little vibes. It's basically designed as this giant over the top kind of event where they bring in all these greatest snowboarders from across the world that all have their kind of unique personality and kind of traits. Put them in this giant competition where these made these huge over-the-top race courses and basically send them down and see who's the best. And all the courses are so specifically well crafted that they all have a different feel. We start off with like Snow Jam, which is like your very smooth kind of basic run through. It's not basic in terms of it's like a normal just straight downhill like a normal snowball hill. It's kind of like that off the start. Then you go into a forest where like trees are falling down, you're grinding on trees, you're going through this deep snow in the forest, you're jumping over crevices and stuff like that. It's super smooth, super well done. Then you'll go to another one where you're sliding through ice caverns, like splitting open as you're riding through, and then you have to grind on the side so you don't fall into like cliffs. And then you go down these like giant tubes, like almost like slides in the ice and stuff like that. It's just, the courses are super creatively done, they're well executed, they're super fun to ride, and you'll really never get sick of playing any of them. Again, I don't know how well I'm doing describing this game, but it's one of those games that you gotta see or you gotta play to experience just how well this game's crafted, especially if you're a racing game fan or a snowboarding or skateboarding game fan. This is, in my opinion, the masterpiece of any of those genres. The music in this game is really well done. It has a great soundtrack of a bunch of different like actual like licensed music. You got like Black Eyed Peas, Finger Eleven, a bunch of Yellow Card. You have a bunch of other. It's mainly like metal, rock, rap, and pop. And this is one of those games I have super nostalgia for. The first time I ever played this was my Nana rented it from a local game store from me, and I played through it the first time, and I was enjoying the heck out of it. So I specifically saved up money, asked for a game through for my birthday. This is like, GameCube's been out for like years. They were on like the clearance racks for like $90 to $100 type thing. So I asked for one for my birthday, got one for my birthday, went out specifically, bought a copy of SSX3 first just so I can finish the stuff I didn't get to on my first playthrough and finish the crap out of this game. Just to show you how much I've enjoyed this game, I have beat this game with every single character, got them full stats across the board and fully customized them on my main save. So right now I'm just going through on my Elise playthrough, or whenever I want to play through it, and trying to get all the platinums. That's kind of my goal with the game. My favorite go-to game, it's my favorite game of all time, has the nostalgia factor of being a childhood favorite game. It's just an amazing game. In my opinion, the best of two genres out there. Alright, so there we have it. That is the end of the top 100 games of all time series and the end of my top 10 games of all time list. Definitely let me know how you enjoy the series and this video in particular. Do you agree with the games I put on my list? I know it's more of a personal list, but do you think any of the games deserve to be over the top of others that I've shown on my list? Or do you just hate the choices I have? Let me know in the comments. Definitely let me know some of your guys' favorite top 10 games of all time. I'm definitely always enjoy checking out other people's videos, either collection videos or other top 10 games lists of why people have certain experiences and certain draws towards certain games. I find really interesting. Once again, thanks for watching. Thank you for supporting the channel and this series in particular. This has been one of my favorite series to make, going back and playing some of my favorite games of all time and just experiencing some of those games that I haven't picked up in a while but are just incredible games. It was a lot of fun for me to do. Hopefully it was fun for you guys to watch and experience the series. Again, if this is your first video out of the series, I will link the playlist in the comments below. I appreciate it if you could check that out. And as always, thanks for watching. And remember, everybody has some nerdiness at their core.